Courtroom update time. It's a good day to be a Bundy. It's an even better day to be a patriot. It's definitely a good day to believe in your founding fathers and the United States Constitution. So it's about 7:30. I'm just getting ready to leave the courthouse, and I promised I would do an update, and so I am going to deliver you guys good news from the day. It was a good day in court. It was a hard day. It was difficult having Carol and, of course, Lavoie's wife, Jeanette, and daughter, Tara, because they did play some videos. The defense played some videos of Lavoie. And they're usually difficult for us to see, but it was even more difficult to see the videos of Lavoie teaching with Jeanette in the room, knowing that she has actually suffered the biggest loss and the biggest tragedy from all of this. So let's see. I'm going to start off with one thing that I think has left this case very confusing to some people. So some people say Ammon Bundy did not speak for me. And they, a minority of the people in the town said Ammon Bundy did not speak for me. So on the way to the courthouse today, I thought we needed to address something. We need to address the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy. Because in a democracy, it's okay for you to say Ammon Bundy doesn't speak for me. If the majority in Harney County rules, even if that majority is government employees, in a democracy, that majority would be able to change the laws. But in a constitutional republic, it's very different. In a constitutional republic, it is our elected officials' obligation to the people to represent us, even when we are the minority. Our founding fathers fought desperately to have that protected because they knew firsthand what they had experienced with being the minority and wanting liberty and freedom. They were the minority. They understood the minority. They were not interested in only doing what the majority wanted. Had they listened to the majority, they would have not fought for our freedoms, and the American flag would not fly proudly for liberty and independence. So when Ammon Bundy spoke, as long as he's speaking in the context of the Constitution, he does speak for the American people. If there's people living here that are traitors or foreigners or don't support being in a constitutional republic, they are free to leave. They are free to say Ammon Bundy doesn't speak for them. But they are not free to say that Ammon Bundy doesn't represent the founding fathers' original intent or the true heart of the American people, because the true heart of the American people is to be free. So when Ammon Bundy speaks and teaches on the Constitution and on liberty and freedom, he is doing so on behalf of the true American people. It is absolutely okay if you want to live in a country that is run by communists, but that's not this country. So understand that heading into this, that there's going to be things in this trial that many people don't understand or agree with, but that's only because they don't understand or agree with the United States Constitution. It's not because their actual problem is with Ammon Bundy or because he represents the minority and they represent the majority and therefore they should be listened to. He should be listened to because he represents the founding fathers' original intent, as does his brother and his father and his other brothers. So we start out the day with a little bit of jury instruction. I missed that because I really have a hard time with everything I have going on at home to actually get here before 9 o'clock in the morning. But I did make it here a little bit after 9, which is when they were wrapping up giving jury instruction to the jurors. And I try not to read the notes because it does distract me. Then they opened up right into prosecution. So I try to be pretty honest when I'm sharing my opinion. I was intimidated by prosecution closing arguments. I thought they were just going to kill it. I thought they were going to pull out all the stops and bring out things they hadn't brought out before and really try to paint these guys in a bad picture. I thought they were really going to try to nail Ammon and Ryan as the leaders of this conspiracy in an attempt to get a guilty verdict on somebody. It was Ethan Knight who gave closing arguments, and he's already a little guy, but let me tell you, today he was even littler than normal little. I mean, like little, okay? I think that he was a little guy. His voice was quiet. He stumbled over what he was saying. He didn't believe in what he was saying. You see, the last couple days, a lot has come out about the prosecution. The fact that the prosecution sent an FBI agent to interrogate a witness, an FBI agent who had just come off the witness stand for the prosecution, then went and interrogated Dwayne Schrock, and that came out in court. Another thing is they've constantly brought up the shooting range, and yesterday, of course, the witness Kilman came out and revealed that he was a government informant, and he was the one leading the training. And we've heard all about this training that Jeff Banta did, learning how to pull people out of the car and disarm them. And then here we learn just before the end of the case that the person who instigated that and showed up on the scene to teach that was in fact a government informant led by the government. Okay, so something they were trying to use, and the picture they were trying to paint was in fact a government employee doing this work. On top of that, the video they played multiple times for the jury of the guys practicing shooting, almost like they were out on a driving range. That video came out the day after the informant, Kelman, showed up. He was only there for 2.5 days. In the time he was there, he was able to train these individuals, make a video of them shooting, train them how to shoot, and then produce this video that would then be used in court to show that these people are armed, scary, dangerous people being big, scary men out in the middle of nowhere shooting their guns. So it's okay for informants, based on our government's rules, to be on the site. It is not okay for informants to be a part of the conspiracy or be leading in any criminal activity, which is in fact what their informants were doing. On top of that, Kelman was very aggressive. He was the one who wanted everybody to show their weapons. When Ammon said, we really don't need our weapons to be open carry, having it concealed if you feel as you need to be armed is fine, but there's really no reason to have our weapons out. So here you have this government agent provoking them to do things that Ammon himself wasn't even comfortable with. So in closing arguments, I can say that Ethan Knight did not bring it, okay? He did not bring it. He was disappointing, to say the least. I'm going to state a few of the things that he said. His closing arguments went for 2 hours, and let me tell you, it was 1 hour and 59 minutes too long. We've been hearing this man's voice now for, I don't know what, 9 months, 8 months. And today was actually one of his most pleasant days. But nonetheless, we're still done hearing it. So he was quiet. He was calm. He didn't have a lot to say, and the things he did bring, quite frankly, were embarrassing to see that this is truly the case that they have against these individuals. This is truly the case they have that they decided was worth $100 million of our taxpayers' money. So he brought up first that though Ryan stated his plan was to return the cameras that he and Lorie took down, he brought up the fact that those cameras were not in fact returned. He stated the cameras that Mr. Bundy says that the FBI could come and pick up were not returned and were in fact in Linda Beck's office when the FBI finally had access to the building. Okay, that's only because the FBI didn't take up the offer to go pick them up. So the fact that they didn't go get them is really not everybody else's fault when they said, come get your cameras if you want your cameras. Then he played a video of Lorie, and I didn't even write down notes on that because it was such a good video. All I could think of is, why is the prosecution playing this video? At the end, Lorie says, steady as she goes. Oh, I remember. It was a video where he's promising the people of Harney County that he wasn't going to leave. And I was thinking, the prosecution thought that they were showing how Lorie intended to stay, but I was watching it, listening to how honorable he was, that he was promising the people who wanted him to stay that he wouldn't abandon them and he wouldn't leave. So it seemed a little bit silly because he did specifically say, for all of those who are worried that we are going to abandon you and leave, we are not going to leave. We are here for the long haul. And at the end he said, steady as she goes. I thought it was a great video. Let's see, he stated that there were firearms in areas that no firearms were permitted. Let's see, he said no weapons were permitted. So closing arguments, they can kind of lie because it's closing arguments. And opening arguments, they can do the same thing as long as they focus on evidence that was brought forth in the case. But he made the point to say that there were firearms on the refuge when in fact no firearms were permitted. Okay, yes, they are permitted. They're actually in the brochure. There's a man holding a gun shooting at a bird because they're allowed to come and shoot at the refuge. So why he said that, I'm not sure. Then he went on a woe is me kick, where he seriously painted a picture of Ammon as not liking the federal government. And he said, quote, "These people came. They went to attack people whom they did not like. They converted their office space into a firing range. This inherently is intimidating." One, how can you convert an office space into a firing range? And two, that's not inherently intimidating. And three, Ammon Bundy never said he doesn't like the employees who worked at the refuge. But apparently this is the best Ethan Knight has to bring. He says, you can't do that. That flies in the face of the law. Okay. He says, even Terry Linnell said that the presence of firearms was scary and that she was concerned for children's safety. So then 11:30 a.m. we come back. We're halfway through at this point, you guys. This is what he's brought at halfway through. The fact that cameras weren't returned, that guns were in a place that were not permitted, which is a lie, and that Ammon doesn't like people and took over their offices, therefore, because he doesn't like them. So then he says, let's talk about the killing of Lavoie. What is this case about? Let's see. This case is about the rule of law. That's what this case is about. And then he discussed videos of Banta and Fry showing that the refuge was in disrepair. Then he says, so if there's a burglary and somebody comes and steals from you, he says, just because there are claims and perhaps some evidence that the place was kept clean does not mean that a burglary did not in fact take place. He was just making a comparison. If somebody breaks into your home but they leave it clean, are you somehow happy because they left it clean? And then he says, this is for you to determine if the FBI had anything to do with the damaged doors or the guns left behind. That's your burden to sort through the evidence. Well, we don't know if they did because the FBI won't disclose who all their informants are. So as we're looking at guns that were registered to individuals, and we're looking at damage, and we're looking at mess left behind, we don't know how much of that was from the FBI. They wouldn't tell us who the 2 Navy SEALs were that Ammon and Lavoie and everybody else believed to have been informants that had shown up the last 2 days. We don't know who they are. So for him to even say it's for you to determine is a little bit of a joke when he won't tell them what role the FBI played at the refuge. And all of the information they have gotten on that was not because the prosecution was forthcoming. It was because OSP slipped up about Mark McConnell. Terry Linnell was subpoenaed and admitted on her own that she was an informant. And then Kilman was asked point blank if he was an informant. So none of the information given is for the jury to decide that was given from the prosecution. The only truthful information that was given came from sources outside of the prosecution and FBI. Then he says, there's this focus around all these guns that were left at the facility. This is not a whodunit regarding who owned what gun. They were all there. They all entered into a common space that was not their own. Trenches were dug. Garbage was left. Computers were used. A woman's paperweights were taken from her desk. I'm not kidding you guys. An employee's wildlife jacket was taken. I'm sitting there going, did you really just include that in your closing arguments? The paperweights were taken and a employee's jacket was missing? Is this the best you can bring, little Ethan? I felt like putting him on my lap and reading him a bedtime story is what I really wanted to do. I just thought he's had a rough day. Let's just try this again tomorrow because he is not ready to bring closing arguments at this time. He says, It's important to notice that everyone has a role in a conspiracy. And then he brings up Ammon's phone, the printout they got off Ammon's phone that listed each person's role, and some of them they had to work on claims, some of them was media. He says, see, everybody had a role, whether it was the cook or the person working on the plans to stake claim of the refuge. And he says, at the end of the day, all of these roles were fulfilled in somebody else's space, and they kept them from using their space. Okay, now, so like the last, I don't know, half hour, he just goes through and lists the evidence that they have for each defendant. So Ammon Bundy, he says, who is Ammon Bundy? Get this. Ammon Bundy is a man who believes that certain rules do not apply to him. He selectively chooses what he will and what he will not follow. Mr. Bundy wanted the sheriff to break the rules. You know, the Constitution that he wanted him to uphold. He wanted him to break the unconstitutional laws and uphold the constitutional laws. Our founding fathers would just be disgusted in that, right? He says, let's see, he led others to take over a federal building. He advocated taking a hard stand that was more than just a protest. He kept talking to the media, and keeping everything in the light. He kept talking to the media and stating the role that he was playing, that he clearly was the leader. The Malheur Wildlife Refuge does not belong to him. It was not his to use as his platform. To which I wanted to say, it wasn't yours either, but you guys stole it from the people of Harney County. But we're not going to talk about that because we're talking about a conspiracy charge, not about who truly owned the refuge to start with. Ammon talked about, he brings up, seriously, this is the end. I'm about to tell you the end of the evidence he has that Ammon Bundy joined into a conspiracy. There was this maroon pouch that had money in it and credit cards of the Friends of Malheur Wildlife Refuge or something. So, sorry, phone call. When it was located and they asked him on the stand why he had that with somebody else's money in it and cards, it was in the exact condition he found it. So receipts clipped with X amount of dollars, clipped with a receipt, clipped with X amount of dollars, just totally how he found it. And they said, why did you have that? And he said, I was keeping it in a safe place because it didn't belong to me. So he tried to bring this up again, stating how Ammon Bundy chooses when he will follow the rules and when he won't. So he thinks he has the right, he says, to take over, I think it was 190 or 188,000 acres and make it his own. But he doesn't think he has the right to take this little pouch with money in it. Ammon Bundy just chooses his rules, what he will follow and what he will not follow. But the really funny thing about that, well, it comes back in the Mumford, I'm thankful he addresses that in his closing arguments and makes the point that in adverse possession, you do take over the property, you do take over the building, but that Ammon Bundy was not trying to steal from the people, the Malheur Wildlife, Friends of Malheur Wildlife Refuge, and that was not his money. Now the land, he had a right through adverse possession to stake a claim and to take that. But they have even said, the defendants have even said there was a point where they were getting boxes, getting ready to box up all the supplies that were in the building to return it to the employees, because they said these possessions within the building that we are adversely possessing don't belong to us. So we're going to return these back to the people. And some great statements were made about that in closing arguments from Mumford, but I'll save that. Ryan arrived on January 2nd. He is virtually everywhere. He is everywhere critical. He is at every moment of this conspiracy. When the fence was cut, when the signs were put up that said closed for business, when the new signs were put up over the Malheur Wildlife Refuge signs that were now saying, whatever they changed it to, Harney County Resource Center, he was there. Mr. Bundy took government property. Regarding the camera, he took that. That was government property. He drove pieces of equipment that were not his own. He can be found as a principal, or he can be found as somebody who aided and abetted. But either way, Mr. Bundy was very a part of this conspiracy. When Mr. Bundy offered to come get the cameras, Mr. Appleton didn't feel comfortable going to get them. That's it. That was his evidence on Mr. Ryan Bundy. All I can think of is they're probably going to nail it tomorrow with their last 2 hours, but I thought they would do that today and they didn't. So Shauna worked with Lavoie, Ammon, Ryan, David Fry. Clearly she had a role as leadership in this conspiracy. Her title was to work on maps and titles. Almost like they were trying to adversely possess this piece of property. She even did a radio show, and she stated this. She had a thumb drive with information that she had copied, records that did not belong to her, rummaged through other people's things. Let's see. March 25th, in this interview, she states that she was gathering information that was not her own, because she was going to exonerate the Hammonds. Oh wait, if she was getting information to exonerate the Hammonds, you would think that it was probably things that were public record. But that wasn't hers, never mind. Whose was it then? The people's? Okay, she wanted to take evidence and bring it to the court. So in this recording, she says she's gathering evidence to exonerate the Hammonds because she wants to take it to the courts. Do you hear this statement? When exposing a crime is looked at as a crime, you are run by criminals. They used her saying, I'm gathering evidence and I'm going to present it to the courts. And they tried to present this as something bad. This is what they have on Shauna Cox. In the video, it states she wants to hold the land in adverse possession and give it back to the people of Harney County. Oh, these Americans, they're so greedy and selfish, everything that they're doing, trying to give this land back to the people of Harney County instead of letting the federal government own it. How dare they? She states there's been managers through the years who have been problematic. Therefore, her mission was to impede them from doing their job with threats, force, and intimidation. Not hardly, but okay. Let's see. He says, the only reason they never threatened the employees was because there was no employees at the refuge that could come because it was occupied. In her video with Lavoie Finicum, you hear her yell, gun it. She shows, it shows the more important part about deciding which rules Shauna Cox would and would not follow. And at a scary unauthorized roadblock with red dots bouncing off her head, she had the audacity to flee the scene with Lavoie Finicum and go for the sheriff. No, he didn't say that. Okay, David Fry, he came to help. He was IT. He was a part of the conspiracy because at the front doors, the first thing he said is, I am here to help. David had a gun in the building towards the end. He stayed for 2 more weeks after everyone else left, and his testimony speaks to that for itself regarding his intent. His testimony speaks to his intent to come and protest his government. That's all his testimony shared. David Fry used somebody else's workspace and computer, which is inherently intimidating. That's all for David Fry. Jeff Banta. He conspired by being trained to pull somebody out of a car. And then I wrote, by a federal agent. Is that not entrapment? Wow. He conspired because he trained to pull someone out of a car at that training that this Kilman showed up to do. They're all sitting around and Kilman says, I'm going to do some training with you guys. And one of the things he did is teach them how to pull people out of the car and disarm them. And so now that's being used against them. So it's something good to note that when there's provocateurs amongst us, there's many of them that we've seen that have tried to get us to do things that we were uncomfortable with. It's important to listen to your gut and to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with what you're leading us to do. This just doesn't feel right. Because in the end, there's a good chance you're being set up. He states that he was upset about the Hammonds. He was a part of this conspiracy. This land was tied to that issue, and that is why he came here. Let's see. He reported to us on the stand that he was only to let oath keepers in. Okay, hello, you're supposed to be an oath keeper yourself as a government official. So why would you think you would not have been welcome in if he is only supposed to let oath keepers in? Doesn't that mean that federal agents and federal employees representing the people would be welcome in unless they themselves are actually not upholding an oath? Then they wouldn't be an oath keeper. And that's their own problem, right? Then they're not actual officers of the United States of America if they're not going to be an oath keeper. So in that case, he wasn't hindering them from coming. He says he would not have let BLM employees or Fish and Wildlife in had they come. He talked about Satan. So now we're to the last 2 days. He talked about Satan and how the FBI are just his puppets. So he obviously would not have let any Fish and Wildlife employee or any BLM agents in to do their job. Oh my gosh. This is really what you have. Ken believes that no rules. Ken believes that no rules apply to him. Let's see. He put up his sign because these entities don't even exist. He went to the meetings. He changed the signs. He drove the trucks. When asked if he planned to return the truck that he took to go get groceries, his answer was, yes, I will return it to the Harney County Resource Center. It was property of the federal government, not the Harney County Resource Center. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Didn't you say before that it was a refuge owned by the people? But now it's the federal government. So which is it? Because I thought you said that this was a public building owned by the people. And now it's owned by the king, is what you're telling me. So you're telling me you've been lying to the people of Harney County, making them think that they have this resource center or this refuge building, but they really don't. You're just loaning it to them from time to time? Pretty much. Okay, hold on. I have to skip ahead now because oh, and wait, there's one more. Neil. Okay, so Neil, and it's quick, and then we'll be on to closing arguments, which were just awesome. I did take a lot of notes, though. Okay, let's see. If I can find them. Neil was the cook, guys. Okay, that's what he did. He was the cook right alongside Melissa Cooper. Big, scary Neil. Not at all, actually. Okay, Neil states on record that his efforts are to protect the Hammonds, and it was no bluff. Therefore, he obviously conspired to keep employees from coming to work. He drove 900 miles from California to fight the out-of-control, overreaching government. He says, there was a redress of grievances. Listen to this, guys. And while it may not have been answered, which must have been very frustrating, taking over a federal facility is not the answer. Well, Mr. Knight, what would you say is the answer when they've contacted their elected officials? They've presented you thousands upon thousands of signatures. What was it, like 8,000 signatures they presented, which were a lot of signatures. They reached out to their elected officials. They contacted the judge, the sheriff. They did everything they could, just requesting that this information would be looked at, and you guys wouldn't even look at it. So it's a little bit more than just frustrating for him to say, that must have been frustrating. Who do you think you are, the king? It was more than frustrating. It was enough to get your butt booted out of the office and other people to come and take over your job because you're not doing it. It's not just frustrating. You don't have an option if you're going to reply to the people or not. If the people go to all the go through all the steps that they're required to go through, and you choose to ignore them, you better believe something bigger than that is going to happen. Are you kidding me? Our founding fathers would not be very happy with Mr. Knight right now. They would ship him back to England is what they would do. He says, these defendants are guilty, and that is the verdict you should find. That was closing arguments, you guys, from the prosecution. Now, the rebuttal could end up being worse, but they don't have anything. They don't have anything. So now we're just going to go right into defense. Defense says after lunch at 1:20. So we ended up with just over 4 hours. Like 4 hours and 10 minutes of defense. And I'm telling you, this defense team killed it. They killed it. They did awesome. Mr. Bundy is a family man. He's a man of faith. He pays his bills. He's a businessman. Let's see. The government's argument is what makes the people do exactly what Ammon Bundy did. The executive branch picks and chooses what laws they will and will not follow. Mr. Bundy was calm. He was educated. Let's see. Thousands came to this cause and this movement. It was an honor to try these men and these women behind me as they fight for their liberty. So Mr. Mumford did not, he didn't stutter as much. He was much more calm. I think when he talks more quietly, he doesn't stutter as much, but he really did an amazing job. I mean, I'm Maxine, if you're watching this, I'm really looking forward to your report on Oregon Live tonight, because you sat right next to me and both of our pens were running the whole time. And there were moments where I just really felt that you were understanding that this is so much bigger than grazing fees. And I hope that's the case, and I'm excited to read your article. And I hope that you might even include what I told you about the grazing fees and how Cliven Bundy did pay his grazing fees, but he paid them to the state of Nevada, and the state of Nevada wouldn't accept them, but he refused to pay them to the federal government. Maxine and I talked about this for a minute, and she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "I'm sure." But I said, nobody wants to talk about how Cliven Bundy isn't a welfare rancher, and how Cliven Bundy is actually just an incredibly patriotic man. That he's a principled man, and principles matter to him. And this principle is, it's not the federal government's land. This money belongs to my state of Nevada. He has no problem paying his grazing fees, you guys. You've got to get over the grazing fees. It's kind of like yesterday's news, because it's not true. Okay. You've seen a fight. You've seen a struggle. We have been pushing for the truth this entire case, and we have been denied. What you see is government overreach. You see the government going too far. They did this to the Hammonds, who lit a fire to stop. They did this to the Hammonds, who lit a fire to stop a fire that the BLM actually lit. We presented you the facts so that you can stop government overreach. So then he quotes something from John Adams that talks about the importance of a trial by jury. Otherwise, without it, they'll be worked like cattle, fed and clothed like swine and hounds. He presented so many slides, you guys. So many slides. So many great quotes. He presented videos, Lavoie, Ammon. He presented the most of the K2 interview that Ammon did when he was at the refuge, which was actually one of the videos that really woke me up and got me listening. And so it was kind of surreal to listen to it and be sitting in the courtroom and be looking across at Ammon and Ryan and looking next to me at Jeanette and Carol. And after just visiting Ammon in jail this weekend and just thinking about how different things look than they did when I was listening to that interview at home, how much more complete they are, how amazing it is to be exactly where I am. There's no other place I would want to be than right here in the middle of this case. It's an absolute honor. And they played this video for the court, and I thought that was just great. He played tons of clips. Let's see. So he says, the government picks and chooses when it will follow the Constitution. Should Mr. Bundy have just called his congressman one last time? Mr. Knight excluded that the proper channels had already been taken. He laid this out so beautifully. I'm going to miss like half of it because I could only write so quickly. Then he quotes Woodrow Wilson. Let's see. If you want to make enemies, try to change something. And I thought that was great. Because that's America, right? That's how our founding fathers made their enemies, is they brought forth change. And that's exactly what Ammon Bundy did. And he's so misunderstood right now, and he is fighting for change. He's fighting for change for us. He's fighting for freedom from government overreach for us. And he's hated by many people. And I'm so proud to say that I am too hated by some people now. It really does make me feel proud, because I feel like I'm in really great company. He says, what will we leave for our children? If we're going to bring change, we have to bring change now. Let's see. His problem is not with the employees of the BLM. His problem is with the employer. The employer will not respect limits. They've charged him with conspiracy like a mobster, like someone who does something in the dark. And Ammon Bundy did nothing in the dark. 1,000+ people came to do what? To commit a conspiracy? A conspiracy is not something that you do in the light, as Ammon Bundy did. Why did he want to end up in court? Because he knew that this was a title dispute. He knew that the federal government had not received proper authority through the legislators to gain ownership of this refuge. He wanted this to be in the court so that he could challenge the title issue. He knew that they would be able to provide the evidence to the court that they didn't acquire the land based on the Constitution. He says, let's see, there were more confidential informants than we have defendants in this room. They charged the cook, but not the informants running the shooting range. Think about that one for a minute. They charged the computer kid, but they can't identify the 2 Navy SEALs who came the final days and kicked doors in, smoked inside the buildings, were destructive, and yet they had surveillance on the refuge the entire time. They had all these informants inside, yet they still cannot identify these 2 men. Because if they identify these 2 men, they'll be able to prove that these 2 men actually kicked in the door and caused damage, which would then, that'd be bad, right? Then he goes on to explain what the presumption of innocence beyond a reasonable doubt is. He says, before this was for the jurors, so that they wouldn't find someone accused they wouldn't find somebody guilty due to an issue of righteousness connected to a religion. Now we have the separation of religion and state, and it's more to protect the individual from being found guilty before their accusers have presented evidence against them. He says this, at first it was reasonable suspicion. Hang on just a minute. It said reasonable suspicion was the first step, probable cause, and then preponderance of the evidence, clear and convincing evidence, and then beyond reasonable doubt. These are the steps that the government has to go through to prove that these men are guilty. You don't have to see this, and I didn't quote him on everything because it was 4 hours long, but I'm kind of getting you guys the more important things that I picked up on. You don't have to see this as winning or losing, because when you acquit Ammon Bundy and the co-defendants, a man like Ammon Bundy, if he is acquitted, everyone wins. Then he goes through what conspiracy is. He lists out that there were 47 government witnesses. Of the 47, every one of them except for 3 were either FBI, United States Fish and Wildlife, Malheur Wildlife Refuge employees, or state police. 47, all but 3. Now listen to this. Of those 3, let's see. Of those 3, 2 were paid. Wait, Butch was one of them. And then Nicholas Bluer, something was off with him. Okay, of those 3, only 2 of them were not paid. knowingly paid by the government, because Andy Dunbar was paid, him and his son, $4,000 and lied under oath repeatedly. So of 47 government witnesses, now we have 2 that were not paid. One of which was Nicholas Bluer, who was smirky, and you could tell something was very off with him. And the other one was Butch Eaton, who actually turned and became a witness for the defense while he was on the stand. So of the 2 that were not paid, one still appeared like something was off and like he had some deal that was being made. The other one turned and was actually a witness for the defense. Agent Jones had his interview with Dwayne Schrock and kept asking questions after Dwayne told him to stop. Jones never even went to the refuge, yet he was questioning Dwayne on how many guns were there. How did he even know how many guns were there? He was only going on the information that his informants told him. And yet he was questioning Dwayne, trying to get Dwayne to admit that there were more weapons in the daylight that he could see when he was there than was actually present. Dunbar could not have been telling the truth about what he could see from the gate. So they did a couple of videos over the last couple weeks, and they didn't explain to him. Actually, some of them they did at the beginning of 6 weeks. And they didn't explain to us what they were, but we knew they would tie in somehow. So he says, remember the video that we played for you guys where we drove in between Dunbar's property and the refuge? And we pointed out what all the visuals were, what you could and couldn't see? Now I want you to go back and think about Dunbar's testimony. He said that there was a gun in the tower, but you now know from the video you saw the only thing that you could see was the scope that they would use for visual. You wouldn't have been able to see if there was a gun in the tower. Let's see. He couldn't see anything from the gate, but he said that he could. Dunbar was paid from, get this, Ben Jones. They posted the receipt. Dunbar actually received his $4,000 from Ben Jones, the same agent that went and harassed Dwayne Schrock. So he's painting the picture here about how dishonest the government has been with the evidence that they've presented. And Dunbar also said that he was paid, I want to say it was like the last week of the occupation, but on the receipt it was stated that the service dates were from January 2nd to February 22nd. This is the same informant who intimidated Schrock and tried to get him to change his testimony. Conspiracy cannot be with an informant, yet we have 9 informants that are still not identified. So we have Terry, Mark, Fabio, and that's all. Those are the 3 we have identified. Let's see, the video at the shooting range was the day after Kilman, also known as Fabio, arrived, and he led the group at the shooting range on January 25th, and then of course presented that video. He was there January 24th through the 26th. They asked at the ambush when they said that Bundy was almost friendly when they arrested him. Who in the car with Bundy had a gun? There was Ammon, Mark McConnell, and Brian Cavalier. Is that all? Was there just 3 in that car? What does that sound wrong? Am I off on that, guys? I don't know. I think it must have just been the 3 of them. It's too late for me to go back that far in time. Mark McConnell was the only one with a gun. And they keep talking about how the presence of guns was so heavy, and yet when they pulled them over, Mark McConnell, the informant, was the only one with a gun. 3, yes, I'm right, okay. Who were the other 6? Did they contribute to the conspiracy? We don't know who they are because the court has sealed their names. The government will not be forthcoming with these witnesses that have been brought before the defendants. Then he showed Exhibit 110, a red-haired, bearded man at the refuge with a gun. He says, remember at the beginning of the case how the prosecution used this to show how intimidating the men at the refuge were? And he said his point over and over was how deceptive the prosecution has been with all their evidence. How their evidence truly has not been evidence. It's been circumstantial evidence. It's been things that you could go one way or could go the other. So in closing arguments, Mumford went and explained a lot of these things. He says, remember when Brandon Rapola took the stand and said that they were only there for about 15 minutes, that they had nothing to do with the occupation and they had only come for a press conference, and that bearded man with a big gun was there as his own personal bodyguard. He says they have to prove their case, but they can't deceive you. Do you feel deceived right now? Ammon has waited 9 months for this. He is counting on you. The only thing between the federal government overreach, and Ammon is you. Speaking to the jury. Then he shows a picture of Scotty with the gun by the truck. And we know Scotty basically turned, and I don't know. I think he was an informant the whole time, but maybe he just turned and gave information. They showed a picture of Scotty with the truck. They actually show they show it as intimidating, but the scope is covered. It still has a cover on it, and he's holding it in a very safe position, and it looks like he's posing for a picture. And so, of course, they ask again, who was taking these pictures? Was it an informant asking Scotty to pull his gun out and stand in that pose so that he could present this picture? We don't know. Hang on, I'm going to plug in my phone. We don't know because the prosecution won't tell us who its informants are. So for all we know, no gun was present until the informant said, hey, I have to plug in my phone, so I'm going to turn it for a minute. So then the informant may have said, hey, can you stand there for a picture? And then pulls his gun out and takes a picture. We don't know because they're not bringing forth. Does it make me crooked if I turn this like this? I don't know. Okay. Whatever, we'll do it like that. No, I won't do it like that. Oh, I spend way too much time right now in the car. Okay. Adverse possession. So he goes way into adverse possession. It was really quite awesome. Okay, so adverse possession. He says the government stated that by the very nature of adverse possession is Ammon Bundy admitting that he impeded officers from coming to work. If he was taking over the facility for himself, even through adverse possession, then by nature the employees could not come to work. The defense rebuttal or response to that was, in adverse possession, the new owner must act as the owner. He must make improvements. He must clean the facility. In some ways, these are the worst conspirators I've ever met. This is not how you conspire. He shows a picture of Dwayne, and he says this man has a pistol on his hip and an American flag on his back. He shows the exhibit of a man with red boots on and a gun on his hip, and he says, is this an informant posing for this picture? It was just a small gun on his hip, but still his question was, this picture was entered into evidence, and you, as the jury, do not know if you're looking at a defendant, at an occupier, or at an informant. And he said, don't you, as the jury, want to know if you're looking at an informant or a co-conspirator? He said, you have the right to know this so that you can judge this case on truth. And instead, we have all these pictures, and maybe it worked to the defense's advantage that they didn't disclose who the informants were. Maybe the informants were none of those people. But you know what? The government is operating in darkness and won't reveal it, so they don't know. Let's see, there's a video where he says, the prosecution showed a video where Ammon said, basically tomorrow there's going to be shock and awe. But it was a rough draft he did on his phone, and then he just didn't delete it, but he didn't go on and finish the video. Well, the judge would not let the defense play the full video to explain what the shock and awe was. So the prosecution was allowed to introduce that to show that Ammon Bundy was intending to intimidate